What's poppin', mi gente? You know who it is, and I'm back with another video. So, I initially didn't plan to make this video, but seeing as how I haven't put up a changelog in about 2 weeks and 2 days now, and I like to do one every 2 weeks, I figured I would. A changelog is coming, but I do want to finish working on this effect, and I want to make another video showing off a couple of things that I've been doing, as I've primarily been working on the Dracula battle, putting in the sprites, animations, etc. However, this week we're going to focus on one particular part of the battle, and that's Dracula's transformation effect when he goes from his first form to his second form. The reason I'm going to talk about this is because I want you guys to get a good view, a hands-on view, and more of a grasp of what kind of hell I can go through here doing some of these effects. People don't realize that effects can, when you're doing them yourself already coming up with the new creative effects, it can take hours, sometimes days. When you're trying to copy somebody else's, it's a whole other ball game. Because it's not always as easy as just hacking into the original game and disabling a couple of values. No, a lot of graphics effects are somewhat hard-coded in, and that means it's a much more arduous task than simply going in and changing something like damage numbers or item placement or the particular background tile used or the enemy used, etc. It can be extremely involved, and in the case of this particular effect, I've now spent probably about a good 8 hours reverse engineering it just this time. I know I did it years ago when I made a release in GM, and I know I wasn't able to perfectly duplicate it, so I created an effect that was close to it. But this time I was determined to do it. First up, a little reference here. Let me show you guys what the effect looked like in the original release of the hack, and this was on the demo in GameMaker years ago. You can see what basically goes on is a lot of additive blending, and the sprite is drawn over itself over and over as it's eventually morphed into Dracula's second form being drawn over and over instead. One more time. And it's not bad, but there are definitely a couple of issues with it, and it is definitely not the same as the original one. For reference's sake, I'm going to play the original. And what I've done is I'm going to go ahead and freeze some values so that it keeps appearing. You can see I was already in the process of doing it, and it corrupted some stuff in the background. But here we go. It's going to show up to the right of Richter. And there's the effect. Hold up. Let's do this again, because this time I actually want to do it in slow motion for all of you. Please note, I did like the original version of the effect I created, but it's not the same effect, so I decided to go in and correct it. But you can see what's basically going on is he's drawn with additive blending, and then it seems like he's drawn over himself over and over, which is a lot like what I did already, but you'll notice there's several things going on here that aren't happening in the original. For one thing, look at how his body's distorting here. How his cape extends outward to cover where the laser going to spawn, and look at how his upper head distorts upward along with part of his torso. There's a weird kind of distortion going on here, and I really wasn't sure what was causing this initially. I looked through the bin file for any possible other palettes that could have been involved in this, but there weren't any, which means it was completely a graphics effect without any color changes. And I thought maybe at first they were taking his second form and drawing it over and over completely colored red, but that doesn't work either, because then if you look at the middle of him, well, this part stays black, and it's like, what's going on here? So what I did was I went into the game and I started corrupting some data. And for those who don't know, I have quite a bit of experience hacking this thing, so I know how to do a lot of stuff. But as I said before, graphics effects are not something that is easily hackable, because in this game they are fairly hard-coded. I'm sure there's a way to edit them somewhere, but it would involve figuring out how to, number one, take the values in there. I'd have to reverse engineer the code, then figure out what each value means, and then I'd be able to edit it. And that's obviously not something I'm going to do if I'm going to be recreating it. It's a total waste of time and would take days to do one effect. Forget about doing it for every enemy and boss in the game. Thankfully, there aren't too many crazy effects, as primarily the bosses use a lot of the unique effects, and most enemies use only minor ones. Some different sub-weapon and weapon attacks have some effects as well, but nothing too crazy. Also, I should have done this near the beginning of the video, but everybody will accept my apologies, hopefully, if my voice sounds a little off here. I'm actually talking with a cut on my tongue and a huge canker sore on my lip, so it's not an enjoyable experience. But again, I wanted to give you guys some kind of update. It's been more than 2 weeks now, and I don't want people to start looting, rioting, and, you know, starting fires all over the goddamn place. I think we have enough of that going on right now all over the US. We don't need me to be contributing to it. Okay, so let me go ahead and just corrupt some data here. And I want you guys to look on the upper left of the screen because that's where it's going to pop up. There's nothing I can do about the positioning here. I have tried multiple times to move it and to no avail. It just doesn't work. Now it's still in slow motion, but hopefully you guys can see what's going on right about here. You'll notice it's morphing from his regular human form into his demon form. It's a little hard to see, but here, I'm going to keep resetting it. And you can see it's very weird because it looks like his body is actually moving and splitting into the demon form. And it's like, how in the world? Like, how is that possible? And it almost at first seemed like, okay, they're drawing the sprite. They have some kind of animation in place where they actually draw him and more have him morph, but that's not the case. I can tell you now there are no sprites in RAM for something like that. There's no space in RAM for those that many graphics. Well, I shouldn't say that. There possibly could be enough space in RAM for them, but they're not stored in VRAM is a better way to put it. I'm 100% certain of that, so that's not possible. And it's not scaling, I can tell you up front, because look at the way his body is warping. Again, I'm sorry if it's a little hard to see, but there's nothing I can do about the transparency level. I've tried multiple things and to no avail. I've tried freezing multiple values. It just doesn't do squat. You know, it doesn't change any damn thing. It still comes out looking the same way. It's a real aggravation. I had to really stare at this hard to really see what was going on here. Especially with the screen breaking up like that, I keep resetting it each time. And like I said earlier, there's no way to move it, so it's a royal pain. But you know what? While I have you guys here, let me try corrupting some values and see if maybe some of this helps. Let's go ahead and freeze him so it only displays Dracula sprite. Now, with this toolbar in the way, it's a little difficult to see, unfortunately. But there's not much more I can really do about this here. I don't know of a way to remove the toolbar. I'm sure I could find one, but it's not worth the effort. But if you look, you'll notice it seems like he's swelling more and more, like his legs split apart, his cape extends outward, his torso swells upward, and it's really weird. You know, because it's one of those things, this looks like an effect that was drawn by hand, but that's not possible. Let me freeze another number for you guys. Let me show you something else here while we're at it. Now that's his second form. I froze it to use the second form sprites, and look, it blinks a little bit, but look how distorted it looks. Like it looks like he's standing straight up and he's using other sprites, but that's not possible. It's totally impossible. I'm going to do something else here to show you guys this hopefully a little better. Give me just a moment because I know it's very hard to see. It's transparent. It's in the upper left, and this is a video, so, you know, my apologies in advance. There's only so much I can do here. Let's just hold on while I set some values. Okay, so I froze one particular value here where it's doing the second part of the animation because it's hard to tell, but the animation splits into two parts. And you can see corrupting it. Sometimes it doesn't even draw it. So just bear with me here till it actually shows up on screen. Sometimes it wants to be difficult. But you can see Dracula's second form is then drawn over and over and over. And that's the second part of it. That's not hard to figure out. So I did get the first part right in my release years ago in GameMaker. Or I did get the second part of the animation right in my release of it years ago in GameMaker. But that still doesn't answer the question about that first part here. What the hell exactly is going on? I mean, it's really difficult to tell at first. But I'll save you guys the suspense, pardon me. I did eventually figure it out. Okay, so let's check this out again. I froze another value here for just the first part to show up. And I'll keep resetting this, a little hard to see it. Now let's do it in slow-mo. You'll notice it looks very weird, like his whole body is being distorted and disfigured. And if you paid attention to what I did before, you'll notice it looks like if you combine them too, it's like he's morphing, like his body changes shape, it looks like, to morph into the second form. But what's going on is he's being drawn over and over, being distorted more and more in his first form. And then the second form is just drawn completely normal over and over. And they both use additive blending. So in GM, I did get that bit correct. He is supposed to be drawn in his first form over and over with additive blending. His second form is drawn over and over with additive blending, and there's just scaling on it, you know, no distortion on the second form. On the first form, there is this weird distortion effect, but it's not actually scaling, and that's where my mistake was. I scaled up the first form, but you could see by scaling him, you're not going to get this. It's almost like there's a spiral that starts to go here, and then all of this starts to warp and change shape to fit with his second form. Like right here is where the legs are going to come out. So how is this done exactly? What else does that leave? It's not scaling. It's not rotation. I mean, it obviously can't be twirling, or the whole body would be twirling up, not just the top bit. This wouldn't just be extending out to the shape. Is something else being drawn here? What exactly is going on? And believe it or not, the answer is so simple. I wanted to kick myself as hard as I could with a steel-toed boot up the most sensitive part of the crack of my ass when I figured it out. Is everybody ready for this? Here's what they did. They are using a 3D primitive and simply dragging on the individual bones to create this warping shape. That's it. This is Dracula 1 sprite right here. If I remove Dracula 2, I just put it so you can see it matches his body shape. You can clearly see it's him. They're using additive blending on it. And all they do is draw this over and over. It starts off normal, like, oh, let's say like this. It starts off looking normal initially like this here. And then gradually, the bones are pulled on to warp it as needed until it matches the shape of Dracula's second form. That's it. That's how they create this distortion effect. With it drawn over and over, it gets brighter and brighter and brighter. That's what's going on. Dracula himself, the original sprite used for Dracula, is behind this effect. It's just drawn all black, which is why it doesn't look as bright and washed out as it does here when it's drawn over and over. This is to make it look a little less washed out. Now, I shit you guys not when I say when I figured this out, I just sat here and felt like... And I mean that. I really felt like a fucking idiot. Like, holy shit, how did it take me so long to figure this out when this is basically the same thing they do when you transform into Mistform? I mean, there's a lot of things in the game that do this to create some unique effects, and it's brilliant because with a simple primitive with, I think it's 16 bones. I want to say 16 bones here, but hold up. Let's count really quickly. That's 8. 17, counting the center one. You're able to do this, and it's very easy to do. See, I can do all kinds of warping just on pulling on the center one. I can do this. It looks like it's being scaled, but it's being twisted and warped, and I can set him up so that it looks like his body is being warped and pulled apart and shifting into this monstrous giant secondary form, and it takes no additional sprites to do that. Just a primitive. Yet another example of the brilliant job the people at Konami were doing during this era. It really does break my heart to see how they've degraded into what they are now compared to back then when, oh my god, they had such talented people and such talented sprite artists that would come up with stuff this creative, stuff that people, I mean, I'll admit, I'd never think of something like this in a million years. It takes such a limited amount of resources and yet is so effective and creates such a unique and amazing effect. As admittedly hellish and difficult as it's going to be to reproduce all the effects in the game, I'm actually looking forward to it. Because even though I'll be sitting around for some of them for 3 days in a row just coding and playing with things, getting them done and looking at them afterwards is going to give me a real sense of satisfaction. Not to mention it gives me a hell of a portfolio full of things, and it also teaches me a lot that in the long run could extremely be extremely beneficial if I chose to pursue some kind of career in game development. Alright, so without going into too many more details, let me just briefly cover the entire process of what the effect does. First, we have Dracula himself. He fades out all to black. Then a copy of his sprite with the arm stretched out is drawn on a mesh. That mesh then has several bones that are distorted as needed. What happens is each step is distorted a little more, and that mesh is drawn to the screen onto, whether you want to call it a render texture or a surface, whatever. With additive blending, it's drawn to the screen at every step or every other step. Every time it's warped, which just keeps drawing on and on and on, and on top of it, it'll make it brighter and brighter and brighter and make it look larger and more distorted step by step. As it does that, the alpha that the first Dracula form is drawn with is decreasing. Believe it or not, it is going down. The reason it's going down is at a certain point in that animation, Dracula's second form, X and Y wise, is going to be scaled up and start being drawn. So this way, what happens is Dracula 1's alpha is decreased, Dracula 2's alpha is increased, that it makes it look like Dracula 1 is fading out and warping into Dracula 2. And then after it gets past a certain point, the next step is a white overlay shaped like Dracula 2 is slapped over it. Dracula 2 is drawn all white, and the effect is faded out as Dracula 2 goes from all white blending color to no all white blending overlay on top of them. I hope I explained that well. I know it's a lot of details. There's actually no scaling going on, X or Y scaling going on in the first part with Dracula's first form. It's all this primitive being warped and twisted and moved around until it eventually matches his shape. Now, if you've been paying attention to what I just said, you might notice if you look back earlier in the video that even though it's twisted and warped to match his second form shape, we're still seeing Dracula's first form underneath it. And the reason is because this is all drawn to a primitive, and that primitive is faded out all at once. That primitive isn't refreshed between steps, which is what makes it looks brighter and brighter. But if I right now move this over here behind this, you'll notice even when the legs match up, you see that square shape. You clearly see it there. And that's why. I could potentially find some way around this, maybe destroying some of the earlier initial sprites, but I'm not sure if I want to do that. I want to keep the original effect for the moment, and later on, if I feel like giving it an upgrade, I can always give it some kind of minor upgrade to correct that. But I'm sure that's some kind of flaw that in the original game was probably uncorrectable without burning through a lot of RAM or resources. They just said, fuck it, it's not worth doing, let's just leave it as is. Because ideally, it seems like they were trying to get Dracula's first form to match the shape of the second form so that it blends better. And it actually makes perfect sense when you think about it, because it's going to make the transition look even smoother. If I reveal Dracula 2 here, it's just going to look a lot better when the outlines of each match each other. Now, with that all being said, the hard part is how to code this. And I'm thinking the best way to do it is going to be to take a simple animation that's 128 steps and start with Dracula looking normal here and ending here, and then using linear blending in between so that it'll gradually just distort and warp. And then I only need the mesh in the initial position and the ending position. However, that doesn't solve the next problem, drawing it over and over on top of each other, because I could easily create a bunch of these meshes, but I really don't want to do that. And the reason I don't want to do that is because you can see how many objects are into each one, and it seems like a waste. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look into seeing if I can take a camera and just draw it to a render texture, and then draw that render texture to the screen, which would be a lot more efficient, because then I could simply play the animation for the mesh here, and then each step, okay, the camera's capturing it, make sure that nothing else is drawn to that render texture, make sure that render texture is not cleared each time the camera draws to it, and we should be good to go. And I think that's doable. If it's not, then worst case scenario, I'll probably have to use about 64 of these meshes, but I'm greatly going to avoid that because, like I've said many times, the quickest way to do it would be the lazy way I just mentioned with 64 meshes. But this is also a learning experience for me, and I'm trying my best to learn how to do things in a very efficient manner. At the same time, I'm trying to make sure I don't burn up. When I say efficient, I'm trying to be efficient on two fronts, both in time and resource usage. Okay? So, for example, if I was to run into a skeleton, for example, putting in the skeleton into the game, I could cut him into each of his pieces for each sprite and then put them together, but that's not an efficient use of time versus the resources that are being saved. In other words, in that case, not cutting up the skeleton is the best thing because it's a small sprite that doesn't take up a lot of resources, and I'm going to save an immense amount of time while losing a tiny amount of resource. Versus if he was a massive sprite like Dracula 2, okay, well, yes, it takes more time to put him together, but I'm going to save a significant amount on resources, which makes the time expenditure worth it. But I value time over resources more, as long as those resources would not significantly impact overall system performance when playing the game. Alright, so that's all I've got to talk about tonight. As I said, the changelog should be up in the next couple of days, a week or so at extreme most. Again, want to apologize if my voice sounds really off here, and I'm slurring my words and even stuttering some, but again, I have a lovely little cut on my tongue, and my lip is swollen as hell from this giant canker sore, and I'm doing my best to not bite it again because, oh my god, talk about lightning going through your lips every time you freaking speak. It's just not fun. Anyway, this is going to be a public video, so if you haven't joined my Patreon page, go join it right now, support this project. You know, the Patreon went down about $50 this month. So, you know, I could definitely use more support. The more support I get, the quicker things get done, because the more funds I have to disperse to people, so I can go ahead and delegate some of the smaller tasks to people that I can afford to pay to get them done for me. The other thing is I recently took up a part-time job because, well, as much as I'm grateful for the $700 or so I'm getting on the Patreon, it's not enough. So I have started working part-time again, and that is cutting into the time I'm able to spend on the project. And you guys will notice this when you see the next change log. You know, there's several days where I didn't get anything done, unfortunately, and then there's other days I was free and I spent about 8 to 10 hours working on it. So I'm still putting in time, but can't do as much if I'm working part-time. Leave a comment down below, like the video. If you guys have any requests on what you want to see next, go join the Patreon, do it there. If you want to talk to the like-minded Castlevania fans, go join the Facebook group, or you can join the forums as well. That's all I've got to say. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope it was a little informative and gave a little more insight into what goes into the creative process when it comes to reproducing these effects. Wish me luck. I'm going to go gargle with some boiling hot salt water and hopefully numb and disinfect this wound so it heals quicker. Before I bring on the pain, though, I want to give a quick shout out to Caio Mesquita and his assistant Antonio Batista for the amazing job they did remaking the Castlevania 3-track riddle. For those who don't know what track that is, it's the same track from the stage where you fight Doppelganger. Very fast-paced, very energetic, and they did an amazing job. I've been looking for somebody to remake that track for over 10 years, and to date, everybody had failed miserably. These guys, though, went above and beyond. So again, want to thank you, Caio. You know, you and your assistant, you did an amazing job here. You know, thank you for putting up with all the times where you presented something to me and I rejected it on the spot, for all the changes you had to make, all the revisions, all the feedback, and all the constant communication. I really appreciate it, and I hope everybody who's checking out this video enjoys the track as well. All right, now I really am going. Have a good night, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Be wary, you know, be aware of what's going on with COVID-19. Be aware if you're in a country where demonstrations are taking place, riots, etc. You know, keep your head up, though. Keep in mind, it's not a bad life. It just might be a bad day. Deuces.